This is the Tapped In Podcast, the podcast for beverage distributors that want to empower their sales team to drive business results. Well, listen up and welcome back to another episode of the Tapped In Sales Podcast, your podcast for beer distributors by beer distributors, here with Data, Mike, Moneyball Ross, and we have the greatest, one of the bestest, most smartest wholesalers in all the land, Dan from Superior Beverage as well, up in the Chicago land, just kind of just little west suburbs of Chicago, right, Dan?
A touch west, about 40 miles due west of the city of Chicago.
I love it. How are you guys surviving the snow right now?
You know, I actually read a fun little buzz fact on the way to work today. We've had as much snow year to date as we got all of last year, but you know, we're hanging in there. It's not too bad right now, but I know we've got some more snow on the way.
Attaboy. I love it. Well, you know, Mikey likes snow. I don't like snow, so you two can love it. Ross would love to see some snow as well. I'm the odd man out on this podcast when it comes to snow right now.
Isn't it supposed to get super cold in Orlando?
It's cold, but it's not frozen lizard warnings yet. That's when it's cold. We're just getting a little light chill, a little light breeze, Ross.
So I shouldn't be buying, like, what is it, shorting orange juice features? What movie was that? Trading Places.
Trading Places.
Great movie.
I burn all my vacation heading south, so no ski trips or snowmobiling in it for me.
Love it. You got your trips playing in Miami this year, Dan?
Naples, and I'll try to make it to the other side of the state at some point.
Attaboy. I love it. Good stuff.
Come up and see you.
So Dan, tell us a little bit about Superior Beverage. Introduce yourself to the listeners out there in the world. Tell them about the business, about yourself, all that good stuff, my man.
Yeah, sure. My name is Dan, with Superior Beverage, family-owned business for over 50 years. You know, grew up in the business, traditional, moving up through a warehouse, delivery. I'm now a successor manager. I work with my uncle and our executive team on, really the strategic and then the day-to-day stuff as well. We're an Anheuser-Busch wholesaler. Like other wholesalers, we've really embraced that full portfolio, that total beverage approach. So now with, canned cocktails and non-alcoholic brands, those are significant volume and revenue drivers for the wholesaler. And we've really pushed our team to embrace those categories. Traditionally, I'd say, we always kind of pictured ourselves as a beer wholesaler, right? And very passionate about the malt side of the business. But over the last 10 years, we've really made a good transition, I believe, to that total beverage approach. And I think everyone, from, the executive team all the way down to sales, operations, and delivery really understand now the importance of being a total bev wholesaler in today's market.
I love it. That's awesome. Have you heard anything from AB on their purchase of Beatbox yet? Speaking of total bev, have they announced anything out to the wholesalers on that side?
They've sent a note out to the wholesalers. It's exactly what you're reading if you were just to kind of reference a Wall Street Journal article. So we actually don't have that brand. So we're excited to hopefully have the opportunity for them to fold that into their equity wholesalers, which I believe they're already in around 85%, including AB1. So, it only leaves about 15% of the network that's not currently selling it, but we're part of that 15%. We're kind of excited about it here in Illinois because it's wine based. So we believe it does have the opportunity to potentially move from its current distribution network over to the AB equity footprint.
Nice. Good stuff. That is high GP too, baby.
Say, high margins and high growth. I mean, shit.
Right.
Upper quadrant all day long.
Yeah, I like it because it's, I wouldn't say it's white space in the portfolio, but we do like it the fact that it's wine based, right? So it can, be sold at retail in more locations where here in Illinois, we've got some limitations on spirits and convenience stores and that sort of thing.
You're going to love having the Tetra Pak hanging around, Dan. You're going to love it. You reseal that sucker back up, put it back in your back pocket, and continue down the road.
Or throw it in the freezer, as we learned a couple weeks ago, right?
That is true. Yeah, that is true. We would only drive a golf cart around while drinking Beatbox, Ross. Never a vehicle on this podcast.
That's popular in Florida, right? Those subdivisions that span
Exactly. The Village
is this a good time to talk about how popular and strong the single serve category is? Is this a good time?
So Dan, one of the things that you wanted to talk about we were talking about, wanting to plan an episode with you. You're really passionate about concept of being transparent with your team, particularly around how reps get paid, how they make money, and just the business as a whole, like trying to elevate the financial literacy of how a beer distributor understands how the business works and how you guys make money as distributorships. So talk us through what got you excited about, because I remember talking to you way back when you were thinking about becoming a VXP client. It was like, at the end of the day, this is about transparency for me. You did great group meetings. Your whole team was involved in the decision-making process. And that was one of the things you really pushed with the rest of your team as well, too. So what's your inspiration and focus around that? And what gets you excited about transparency with your team?
Yeah, sure. So, I think when we think of traditional transparency inside of an organization, regardless if you're, in a marketing company, a beer distributor, a restaurant, you always want to be kind of forthright with where you're going, right? Whether that be the strategy of the business, whether that be some sort of, watered down financial statement, sharing with your middle management or executive team, or just operationally when you're making changes. You always want to be transparent so people understand, the why behind, some of these decisions. And I think historically at Superior Beverage, we always did a good job, with explaining that. But the one area that I felt like we fell down was just some of that gross profit exposure to the reps. We really wanted them to kind of understand comprehensively, like what was, driving the business forward, especially as we kind of made that change, from a traditional mindset of like, okay, we're a beer distributor, we're total bev alc, right? As we got into wine and spirits. But it really, I think, also came down to true alignment inside of the organization. And, one of the things that, I noticed as I started moving up through the organization is that we had really good goals, like for a sales team when they were isolated, right? The sales team was like very focused on getting every case of beer out the door, maximizing, case sales. And when you looked at that and isolated it, you'd say, okay, that really makes a lot of sense. And then when you would look at like our operations department, they were more focused on, delivery frequencies and gross profit per drop. And when you isolated that, it certainly made a lot of sense, right? But when you put those two things together, you kind of had a team that was like moving in opposite directions, right? You had the sales side of the business, pushing every case out the door. And then you had the delivery side of the business that really was, like trying to cost optimize one of our most expensive functions, which is delivery. And as we became more transparent with where we wanted to go as a company, which was kind of aligning our North Star to gross profit, right? We kind of molded those two sales functions and delivery functions to say, hey, this is where we're going, right? We're putting this North Star, we're tying to something concrete, right? Gross profit per case, gross profit per drop, and then that really helped align us as an organizational unit behind some of the decisions that we started to implement. So it really gave us that North Star to say, hey, here's where we're going. And then it got everyone really pulling in the same direction.
Was there any fear in actually sharing that level and being that transparent with the team from senior leadership? Was that something you always knew was right? Or was it something you guys worked towards as a group? Like, this is just a smart thing to do.
Are you referring to like financial statement sharing, or are you referring to more like gross profit per
Just
CE?
a gross profit. Yeah, just a gross profit. And follow up after that, do you share financial statements with anybody beyond the ownership group too?
Mm-hmm. I think there was a little bit of hesitation.
Yeah.
Certainly when you have some like legacy executives who, say, hey, do we really want to share this? Our sales team, members, are they going to reverse engineer this? And you kind of, start introducing fear into the conversation of things that aren't even going to happen in reality, right? But I think it was almost out of a necessity, right? We knew that we couldn't keep paying on case equivalencies. We knew that the wholesaler was taking additional margin and gross dollars almost every year with all of our suppliers through price increases, and we needed a more equitable way to share that with our sales team. So yeah, there was a little hesitation, but I think it was short lived. And of course, when we're making a big change like this, we intuitively think we know the right direction to go, but we also want to play a little bit of devil's advocate and saying, okay, where might this go wrong? And so, you come up with those things as a group and you try to analyze them, 10 different ways. But yeah, a little hesitancy, but we knew ultimately it was the right thing to do, not only for the business, but just as importantly for the employees as well.
Any negative challenges you've noticed? That's always like the question at the end of the day. Like if I wanted to do this, like, is there anything bad that's happened?
Yeah. And, we kind of discussed this. Maybe I discussed this with Mike or Bud. I was prepared to make this shift, right? This transparency shift, this cultural shift to a gross profit focused wholesaler. And of course I say that, I'm paying attention to volume every day as well, right? As every wholesaler needs to be doing, right? It's not that you just throw volume by the wayside. What I wasn't as prepared for, and maybe it was because I was so eager to get this implemented and to get this up and going, was it wasn't the sales team that really didn't grasp onto it initially. It really was like middle level management, and then some of my executive team who, when you come up with this new North Star, you start to question then a lot of whys, right? Where are these discounts that maybe aren't making sense? Do these discount quantities? Where's the participation with the supplier? Is there participation that's, that we're, 70-30 on, right? Why isn't that 50-50? Is there suppliers that have no participation? So as you kind of come up with these factors that affect your gross profit, it starts to challenge the why inside of an organization. And, if you go to any business school, I don't care if it's the local community college or Harvard, right? They always say, like, ask why inside of an organization. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And when we kind of reset the company to really start looking through this gross profit lens, it brought up a lot of why, right? Why are we doing this discount participation this way? Does this quantity make sense? Does this, 10 pallet deal, right, where we move our GP per CE on a high volume brand below, the threshold of what we find is an acceptable rate. So then it's really working with the middle level management team to kind of reset and say, hey, these are some legacy practices. While nothing wrong with them, but it's something that we might want to course correct moving forward. And I would say that was probably the most challenging thing. The sales team was prepared for it. I think they were almost looking for a change like this. It really was like some just, legacy thinking amongst a middle level management that we kind of had to continually like rewire and retrain.
I love that. You're preaching the gospel here, Dan. This is good stuff, right? Yeah. And we talk about transparency and the why all the time. And it comes back to you can't coach in the dark, you can't sell in the dark, and your leadership group definitely can't fix problems they can't see. Now, once you rolled that GP per CE data and numbers to your sales team and your middle management, what surprised you the most?
I would say what surprised me the most was, how fixated they became on not necessarily the gross profit data, but it really shifted a lot of attention to returns and the breakage, right? That actually ate up a lot of our conversation initially. It was, hey, I'm now getting feedback on the returns from my route. And there was, I don't want to say concern, that might be the right way to categorize it, but there was a lot of like questioning of, hey, these are your company's policies on returns. How do you want me to manage a certain retailer? It really went over pretty well from a gross profit standpoint. It was more some of those secondary things that we introduced, finished product loss, as you guys kind of categorize it, that we kind of had to walk the team through.
I wanted to go down the rabbit hole of, because we preach to the gospel a lot of listening to your sales team, right? And when you get that kind of culture, the transparency that you guys have there, right? And you kind of let into listening and taking the feedback back from the streets, from your reps and your middle management, and taking that in. And, a lot of listeners may not use that approach or may not be listening as much to maybe their reps or their middle managers. So what kind of feedback would you give them once you started hearing some of the feedback you got from the reps and from the streets?
The rep feedback is, it goes directly more to middle management, right? And then from middle management, it comes up to me. But, that being said, the feedback was more of understanding, the process. Hey, I want to move the gross profit, inside this account? What's the best way to do it? Is it singles? Is it canned cocktails? There really wasn't any friction between, management and the implementation of kind of rewiring, our brain to say, hey, we really want to focus on the gross profit. It was more of, hey, they came to us with, what more can we do to kind of to accelerate, this account or this brand family. So it was a little bit of feedback, a little bit of coaching, right? But it was more just collaboration with the team.
Yeah. Did you have some reps coming to you? I think back to our organization too about pricing and pricing structure. Once we exposed GP per CE and they were actually getting paid on total GP. So do you have a lot of feedback as far as why are we running this discount or why do we offer this discount to everybody, and kind of maybe questioning the process behind discounting and offering it to everybody when some may not get the results
So
they would like?
Yeah, right. It's a great question. The interesting thing about our organization is those conversations most of the time don't start at the rep level. Okay. I think they're more of, okay, this is the GP per CE on this brand or this SKU. It's really up to me and the team if we see some anomalies to kind of push that back down to the team and say, hey, this is how we're trying to move this, or this is the why behind a price change. Now, that being said, ever since we've made this switch, the discussions about price increases internally at Superior Beverage, and this is just as it's supplier discussions once a year, right? If we find that we've got to make an adjustment mid-year or something that's unscheduled, the sales team is much more receptive to the change. Okay. So I was in an account the other day and I saw a $1 difference between our brand and a comparative. And I asked the sales rep, I said, why are we $1 different, right? We should be at price parity with this brand and sell on the merit of the brand. And if you would go back a year, 18 months, 2 years ago, our sales team would say, no, we want to be $1 lower, or we want to be, 50 cents lower than them on invoice. And now when I'm talking to them about, hey, how does the pricing structure in this account affect, the rate of sale? Should we be taking a little bit more margin for us, the wholesaler, and get price parity? Those are the conversations that are now much easier with the sales team because they're understanding the direction that the company wants to go. They don't know what our FOBs are, right? But they do say, hey, Dan, if that discount level doesn't make sense and we feel like we can put a little bit more, another quarter in our pocket, another nickel in our pocket, and we're going to maintain the rate of sale of this account, they want to do that. Why? Because that benefits the gross profit that they're paid on. So I don't know how much of it really starts at the street level sometimes, but I do know when we have to make a change and we push that down throughout the organization, the why, the transparency, the North Star of gross profit, they're much more receptive to that change because it positively, most of the time, all the time, hopefully, is beneficial to their paycheck.
How much of the transparency of them fully understanding or having a better viewpoint on how they're making their money every day as a sales team, that's being they? That's the them in this conversation. Y'all know that I'm usually the they in this conversation. But the them in this conversation being the sales reps, understanding how they get paid in more detail. Is that played a role as well too? Not just transparency of the data and of the information and how you and the why that the wholesaler makes money the way they do, but also the understanding of how that impacts their bottom line personally too. You notice any difference in that?
Are you talking about their variable compensation plans?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep.
So what we've done, recently is try to take a more simplified approach to variable compensation as relates to Superior Beverage's portion of that variable compensation, right? Suppliers are always going to have incentives that might be 50-50 co-op, they're 100% funded by them. But in this conversation, I'm referring to the variable compensation as it's specific to Superior Beverage. What we try to do is really give a very standard approach to all the frontline sales reps and then middle managers as well, so that they understand this is what's at risk. This is what's at risk if you over-index on your goals. And then here's the percentage of this money that's finished product loss, volume, and gross profit. So that standardized approach has been very well received. And then it makes, periodic check-ins throughout the year as far as compensation, how they're doing, how they're progressing. It makes all that much more linear, much easier.
Yeah.
The reps understand it. We just before, I think we're trying to get too cute with it in certain areas. And it just, when you've got different people on different plans, and right, I'm not talking about fixed or base pay here. I'm talking about the variable. It just becomes hard to follow. So we wanted to streamline it. We wanted to make sure that the reps understand it, and we wanted to make it, fair for them and fair for the wholesaler. So when we're doing better, they're doing better. When we're not doing as well, right, they feel a little bit of that as well. So
back to your point of alignment, like one of the things that you talked about earlier, where how are we going to be aligned? I love the row the boat all the same direction, and we're all moving the same direction. We win and succeed together. There's no, one class of winners and one class of losers. You're all in the same boat all at the same time.
Right.
Simple, easy, manageable.
Yeah, exactly. Simple, manageable, easy for everyone inside the organization to articulate to from us to our team members and from peer to peer as well.
You mentioned that there was a challenge around middle management and, questioning some of the things we've been doing. For me, all the things you mentioned were signs of what we traditionally see with success, right? If you're not questioning some of the processes, then you're probably not doing it right. But I guess the question I have is, what would you do differently? What lesson can we take from maybe some of the unexpected challenges at the middle management level that we could do differently, or that we would do differently if we could do it all over again?
Mm-hmm. So I think when I originally spoke with my management teams, saying this is the direction I think we need to go, me as an individual maybe didn't do a clear job of articulating to everyone the why behind it, right? Maybe it was too much just leaning on, hey, we've got some industry headwinds. We've got to switch, we got to change up what we're doing, right? And it wasn't that basic, of course, but that's how I got these conversations started. And once we were kind of up and going with, VXP, then I wanted to start making some incremental changes to the why. As a wholesaler, maybe some of those whys should have been brought up earlier in the conversation to kind of just prep people for additional changes that were coming. But, again, maybe a little bit of birth by fire here in this instance, but we got there. It just might have been, a little bit longer than I originally anticipated.
I mean, that's understandable, right? You're trying to swim through this change as well, the same way that anybody else would. And when you're always presenting something new as a leader, presenting it is always a fear, right? It's new for you. It's new for them. You don't know how anybody's going to take it. You're in a dynamic of a family business where you've got family members as well, which can present its own set of communication challenges. I know my father and I communicated with each other at work vastly different than Mike would communicate with my dad or Tommy would. I mean, he can't fire me. I can't fire him. Like that was the way that our family chose to operate. Not every family believes that about family members. That was just the way that mine did. So those are things that they present unique challenges in our world that a lot of folks that aren't family members or don't work in a family business dynamic like this don't experience it. So it is a little different to kind of present. I wouldn't be too hard on yourself and actually talking people through that and understanding. But it is, to Mike's point, like why is incredibly important. Dan, I think you've learned how important why is to folks as well as you've made this transition over and over again. And it's probably changed the way you talk about why now when you introduce new ideas or continue to expand the use case of this profitability mindset and the way people are thinking differently at your organization too.
Yeah, I mean, it's just made those conversations much easier. And, now I'm not the only one that's, questioning, some of these pricing decisions or discount groups. Some of these things are being brought up from my sales manager or our controller saying, hey, does this make sense? So it's resonated quite well long term. Just short term, right? There's some challenges for sure, and that's just that's just
so
legacy.
Great.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the other thing I've noticed across new customers that have come on board, obviously we're living in a, say, 4 to 5% declining case volume world across the industry. And if we're focused on volume, then we're looking at a number that's eroding.
Mhm.
And if we look towards profit, obviously, I don't want to necessarily talk about your particular numbers necessarily unless you want to, but how is that a different narrative, a different conversation, if we're looking at a number that we do potentially have the ability to impact positively versus kind of where the industry's going?
Certainly you want to keep sales reviews as positive as you can, right? In light of some of the headwinds that we face as an industry. The exciting thing for me about profitability, and this just isn't about, GP per CE, it's your net to gross, it's your gross profit per stop. It's how all these things kind of come together and represent a healthy wholesaler, is that you can directly affect these things. And I know there's times as a wholesaler, you might feel like, hey, what is my ability to really affect brand X, right? I can get into as many, distribution intermediaries as possible, as many retail accounts as possible. I can push this brand into my market as far as my sales team, as far as they can achieve. But, rate of sale, marketing, we're a little bit reliant on our suppliers. With pricing, with promotional mix, with those things, those are things that the wholesaler can have some level of control over, right? Not complete control, but they have independent control over the ability to affect those things. And that helps shape a more positive outcome when it comes to looking at the business through a profitability lens and not the volume lens. Because, the volume is retail demand, right? And that's ultimately what affects our volume. We can't make more cases of beer or hydration drinks or energy drinks go through a retailer's cash register. We can try to affect it. We can try to push that consumer into our portfolio mix, but it's limited on how much we can actually control. The things that we can control are exciting because that's something that we have more, we can kind of champion the outcome a little bit more. And I think, pricing, promotional mix, those sort of things, those are things that we ultimately kind of highlight now at our sales meetings rather than solely focusing on, volume or industry headwinds. We all know those exist, right? And they're almost universal throughout the entire country. So we want to, keep the momentum that we have, positive. And I think we're doing that. I think we've got a great portfolio. We've got great brands. We've got great brands that are gaining share. We've got difficult challenges as well. So we just want to make sure that, we kind of pinch ourselves and there's reality out there, but we highlight the things that we feel like we can affect the most.
I love that. And, you've mentioned a couple of times now with GP being your new North Star. And as senior leadership, it's always been on the radar, right? You've always watched GP and now you've exposed that to your reps and middle management. You've exposed that to everybody. And with that becoming the new North Star, you think about today's industry and kind of where we're at now, right? If you're not tracking profits in your company, you're kind of lost because the volume, like we've said, is going down. But there's just the total product makeup that's out there too, right? It's very profitable. I mean, if we're only focusing on volume, we're overlooking anything with THC drinks. We're overlooking a lot of energy drinks. We're overlooking, smaller NA drinks that don't have a whole lot of volume, but great GP. So back to kind of exposing that to your reps. And now that that's their North Star as well, do you see that their outlook on the business, their outlook on trends, and their outlook, just attitude all in general, being a little bit more positive now with GP performing the way that it does versus volume?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, because you'd have to step back and say if you're only looking at it through a CE volume basis, right? Their year-to-date compensation wouldn't be where it is. So our efforts to drive GP per CE, our suppliers' efforts to drive GP per CE, our retailers' efforts to take price up as well. Those things collectively help our team. So yeah, there's definitely some sales reps that, probably still focus on volume more than I'd like, but I think collectively where the rubber meets the road, their paychecks are whole compared to previous years, if not more, right? But, 3, 4, 5% more because of this new outlook. So, I question wholesalers that, are really stuck on volume. It just doesn't seem like an equitable way to run your business or share in some of the gross profit upside with your sales team.
Yeah, the PowerPoints in the sales meeting with the GP numbers being green and the volume numbers being red sure does have a different outlook on just where the business is going to. And it's just refreshing to see some green numbers for once in a long time.
Yeah. We start with GP and then we look at volume. And it just intuitively makes sense, right? We're not reinventing, the spaceship over here. We're just starting with the green shoots inside of our organization, share, GP, and then we address volume because it's real, because it's how we've always looked at the business, because it's still an important metric, right? But we just don't lead with it.
You mentioned earlier that your whole beverage and green shoots. I'm curious. We talk about a lot on this pod, but I'd love to get your feedback on where do you think the industry's going? Like where, we've talked a lot about functional beverage, but where do you see things going? Like what do you think the next hot thing is, and what's the status of things that are hot
Tell
now?
us the future, Dan. Lay it out.
Yeah.
Where are we going?
And hopefully it's publicly traded so I can trade on it.
You don't want me to be a financial advisor. I think functional beverage, it's a broad term, right? But I do think consumers are looking for energy still, things that they feel like they're getting some sort of benefit out after they consume. I'm talking about non-alc here, right? So energy, hey, I'm consuming this. I like the taste. There's the benefit now that I'm ready for the gym, right? Or I'm ready for work, or it kind of gets me going. You could say the same thing for, products that have melatonin. Right? There's some sort of functionality behind the brand. I'm particularly bullish on non-alcoholic beer. I think more and more consumers still want to socially engage with, in bar settings and restaurant settings. But I do think that, the newer generation, millennials like myself, are having a moment with alcohol saying, hey, what is the healthy level of consumption? But I think most importantly, regardless of the industry or the product, and I don't know if this really gets enough attention, is the brand and the power of a brand, regardless of the category that you're selling in, whether it be a beer brand, an energy brand, a functional water brand. I think the brand really has to stand for something, and it's got to be consistent, and it really has to be kind of marketed to the consumer the same way over and over and over. And I think that's maybe where kind of craft got into a little bit of, hot water is they really relied on the quality of the liquid and would just kind of come out with, hey, this is a great IPA. This is a great IPA. This is a great IPA. And while that certainly is important, what was the brand behind it? You look at something like Michelob Ultra, it wasn't built overnight, right? It was consistent marketing. It's just true to, what the brand stood for. So, I think there's going to be growth in non-alc. That's probably easy to predict. I think that energy is here to stay. We see a lot of teas doing very well, new age tea in our portfolio. But, almost more importantly, whatever it is, you really have to be true to the brand and kind of be consistent behind the direction that you're going. And I think if you're doing that, you've got a pretty decent shot with the product that you're selling.
Now, one of the things that you did, taking your transparency another level this year too, was around ABP season. And I wanted to make sure with a little bit of time we have left here too, to kind of dive into that transparency with your supplier partners too, and how you handled that. So a lot of times, we're on the back of ABP season, right? It's pretty much done. Maybe a couple people have a few left, but season's over. We've got all our plans for 2026, at least announced to us, whether we've agreed to them or whether they've been finalized or converted over to a wholesaler planning. A whole completely is really to be seen. But my project around this, or in talking about this with you, is how'd that go? You kind of took more of a driver's seat. I'll kind of high level lay the foundation that you took more of a driver's seat and said, hey, I'm going to hold the wheel this year, and I'm going to dictate, maybe a strong word, set a cadence, set a standard of how I'm going to go through ABPs, and really message out from the distributor perspective, from Superior out to suppliers, how your brand's doing, what we see as expectations, what we see as goals, versus what I would have done as a distributor, or Mike and Ross probably would have too back in the day, of like when we were running these things, we're just going to sit down. You present to us, Mr. and Mrs. Supplier, on what you think we're going to do. And then we're going to green fuck you until you get out of our office and move on.
Yeah.
You took a completely different approach. How'd that play out this year? Tell the listeners, give listeners like strategy, why you did it this way and how it played out.
Sure. So just a little bit of high level. I was just unhappy, with what I looked at as, hey, ABP season is over, right? Where, give me a folder of all of our suppliers and, what we've agreed to for the next year. And it lived in emails and, offline conversations. But I just kind of had this thinking like, hey, I don't want to just sit here and be presented to. I kind of wanted the last word, so to say, in these meetings, right? Because it really, if you're taking these things seriously, it's how you set up for a successful 2026, or these are the mutual goals that you're agreeing to. So what we did at Superior Beverage is we put together just like a really simple sheet, right? Supplier, last 52 weeks sales, last 13 weeks sales, volume, gross profit, trends, high performing SKUs, high performing brands, low performing SKUs, low performing brands. And then we had an incentive calendar on there, right? Kind of like a wish list. And when we closed out these meetings with them, we pulled this sheet up, right? And it was pre-populated with all this information. And we started going through it, right? And we said, okay, here's the GP trends per CE. Here's the gross profit trends from a supplier. Here's really a one-page snapshot of how you guys look to us on paper. And we would kind of go through that and just start kind of checking off like, okay, based off your presentation, what makes sense for us this year, right? So that includes, you just presented to us 5 new brands and 10 new SKUs. Do they have chain placement? We're a chain heavy market. What is the sampling budget going to be? What chains do these certain SKUs have commitments from? And it's amazing because if you can finish an ABP on this note, you really don't have to go back to them, at a later date and say, hey, we're not going to bring that in, or sorry to let you down. I know you thought you were going to get that placement, but we're not, because you have so much facts in front of you, right? That the whole plan just kind of fills itself in right there. So we kind of went through this different process. Hey, you're launching this, non-alc beer. When's a good time for an incentive? January makes sense, right? We kind of marked that down. Hey, here's the SKUs in the portfolio that are under a certain gross amount, right? For us, we chose $1,000, right? If you're a 20 million case wholesaler, $1,000 isn't going to be your number. But, hey, we're going to delist these and we're going to bring in new stuff. And we're making those decisions on the spot. We're making those decisions with, up-to-date numbers. And we leave there really on the same page. And it really felt for the first time that we kind of were in the driver's seat for these meetings. So, it takes a little bit of preparation, but once you kind of get the template down, it maybe took me 30 minutes to put the information in and then to review that at the end of these meetings. And it's been fantastic. We tentatively kind of have our entire incentive calendar planned out for next year. Our forecasting team knows when they're going to have to bring in new brands, new SKUs that we've agreed to. Our front office team knows, the SKUs that we have to delist. And we kind of tentatively, we know our CPC spend per supplier, how we're going to allocate that. So it's kind of like a plan on a page, but you're doing it with the supplier during their meeting. And because you have all the information there, it really helps kind of tie a plan together.
So Dan, you're saying that ABPs are not just all handshakes and hopes?
Yeah, rainbows and lollipops. They certainly can be. And they can come in, present, and you can just go back to doing what you do as a wholesaler. But to me, it just wasn't effective. And if you're serious about change, and if you're serious about moving the needle, and if you're serious about cleaning up your portfolio to get rid of dead weight, this is the time to do it. And you'd be very surprised at how many of our suppliers agreed with the strategy that we were going. hey, medium-sized supplier, we've got, 15, 25 SKUs. We want to get rid of these 5, and hey, we're only going to bring in 1. Okay, we get it. Like they're hearing this from other wholesalers too, I think. If you're a supplier and you've got a SKU that's doing less than $1,000 GP on a year-round brand for a wholesaler, you look silly if you're trying to sit there and kind of convince them why they should keep it. So, most of these suppliers were really on board with this direction. So it was much easier implementing than I think I, kind of had in my mind, and our sales team had as well.
Yeah,
Middle management, I should say.
I feel like a lot of us are a little hesitant to push back. I wouldn't even call it push back, right? You
Right.
pushed back, you came in with the strategy and plan. But I feel like some of us are a little bit hesitant to do that. I mean, overall, it sounds like their reaction to you constant new students coming in pretty good. But overall, like, what was it to your structure, your new approach to ABPs? Do they like that, or were they like, I had a different plan?
They liked it. They did. I think it was funny because the first few times we did it, they thought they were done, and then we're like, hey, one more thing, and then we kind of pulled this up. But yeah, they left knowing where we stood, and I think just having a good meeting, right? And I told people if like a SKU didn't meet our $1,000 threshold, I said, hey, that doesn't mean we're just automatically delisting it, right? But that means we've got to put a plan on paper right now that for next year it's got to be over $1,000, right? So it's just about setting up not only in the next month, in the next year, but then going back to that maybe 6 months through next year, and then the following, right, November, December in 2026, and referencing some of this stuff.
Love it.
If you've got, to your point, if you've got items that are that slow, I mean, that's $250 a quarter. That's nothing, on paper. Like, it's a layer a quarter, right? Like, how do you manage inventory on some of these items? And it's probably even less than a layer of quarter because you're looking at a GP side rather than revenue side. But how do you even manage inventory? Keep it fresh, keep it rotated the right way. Those are all things that just, even as a supplier, like if they want freshness, if they want good liquid out in the market, they should want to have that conversation with their distributors around how fast an item is moving.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, logistics play a huge role in our business, and fresh inventory. But yeah, to your point, they're honest with themselves too, right? And these are good meetings, right? It's not supposed to. We're not supposed to come out of there, shoulders and really disagreeing with each other. What's good for them is good for us. What's good for us, is good for them. So if we're just honest on what we want to achieve with them, and we show a path of how to get there, right? We still want to be up 1% or 2% with your brands, but we're going to do it by concentrating on, these 4 or 5 brands and try to ignore some of this tail. They get it, right? A lot of these people have worked on the wholesale side. This isn't new news to them. They're smart. They understand the business. And, when the numbers are in front of them, these aren't manipulated numbers. These are just RAS reports that anyone can run with, minimal training.
Did you do any like quartiling, or you did your $1,000 per SKU for GP on qualifying SKUs? Like, hey, we're going to look at these and maybe we will cut them, or maybe we won't. But you actually had a conversation about it. Did you do any qualifying around whether you're going to be on incentive calendar or not, based on size and scale of each individual supplier as well too? Like, this middle tier gets X number of months, this next tier gets that number of months, and the bottom rung maybe gets once a year or maybe not at all. Any of that too?
Yeah, so nothing formally on paper as far as a CE equivalency to determine how many incentives you get. I will say what we're doing this year is, previously we wanted to run an incentive with XYZ Beverage. Well, it's a company-wide incentive, right? And so the grocery team had a crack at it, the small format team had a crack at it, the on-premise team had a crack at it. And with how many suppliers we represent now, we're being a little bit more segmented into what we're putting on incentive outside of our Anheuser-Busch National Incentive Calendar inside the sales team. And what that's allowed us to do is to accommodate a few more incentives, right? because we're saying, okay, this brand makes sense in the on-premise. Doesn't make sense in small format right now, and it has no large format chain commitments. So we kind of can slot that in to on-premise without double booking, so to say, small format and large format. So we've tried to open up our incentive calendar a little bit and just kind of be more targeted with our approaches. And then we were transparent with all of our suppliers and said, here is a wish list, right? If it's a 30-day, 60-day incentive, tell us the months that you want, right? And now we're in the process of going back, reviewing that on like a master Excel file, and then kind of prioritizing those incentives based off of, what we see the brand either has done historically, what we think it can do, what category it's in, how much we can scale it up. And then we're starting to piece together that incentive calendar for 2026. But to answer your question directly, no, we never came up with an official, hey, you're less than 5,000 CEs, you either don't get an incentive or one incentive. We're just trying to manage it for this first year with a little bit of our intuition and historical knowledge.
Dan, thanks for coming on the pod today. You've provided such incredible information to the crew to listen to and to ponder and to think about why, to think about transparency, to think about how do we actually do ABPs more efficiently and more effectively with our suppliers too. If anybody wants to get in touch with you and learn more or spend some time talking to you about any one of these subjects, how do people get in touch with you? How do they find you, my man?
Email is the best way to reach me, Daniel Deufel at superiorbeverage.com.
Awesome. We can put that in the show notes as well. So you're able to actually grab that there. So that'll be posted in the show notes. If anybody's got questions for Dan or wants to send them directly to us, you can email us at info@vxptech.com. That's info@vxptech.com. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today. You rock. Yeah. Cannot thank you enough for joining the pod. Incredible information. Ross, Mikey, you guys rock as always. Santa Claus Mike is off and running again this week. So cheers, boys. And we will be back together again very soon.
Cheers.
All right. Thank you. Cheers.